Mr. President. Senator Bayer.
Thank you, Mr. President, to debate the bill.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, fellow senators. And my timing was not planned. I will be brief in the sense that the good senator from 22 has made several of my points. I won't be as candid as to say ditto, but I would like to make a few points, if I may, Mr. President. Mr. President, I've heard far more conjecture and opinion than fact, with all due respect, in regards to this measure. What that speaks to is a lack of appreciation for unintended consequences and the implications of this language. To me, that is a very compromised lawmaking process. I also take some issue with some of the proponents, and if I may read, Mr. President, from the Idaho Health Exchange Alliance sheet in support of this measure.
Senator may read.
Thank you. Simply one excerpt. Choosing to do nothing is a vote for a federal exchange. Mr. President, good senators, without drawing any criminal comparisons, if there was an act, or as has been stated on the floor, a violation that is inevitable upon my neighbor, and I am not willing to conduct that act or facilitate it or implement it, that does not mean that I condone others conducting that act or that violation. I don't think that that is a fair analogy whatsoever. It has also been stated that we are where we are through actions starting at the federal level, going through the courts, law of the land. Well, with some of that gnashing of teeth, Mr. President, I understand the frustration. I would like to point out the timeline, though, and Mr. President, if I may reference FY 2012 Idaho Legislative Budget Book.
Senator may reference that and read.
Thank you, Mr. President. That has been referenced in this debate. That was the Department of Insurance's budget request and the recommendation from the governor at that time for $2.5 million for a state health care exchange, and with the recommendation from the second floor of 3 FTPs for that department. That measure, carried by the good senator from 27, it failed in the long run in the entire legislative process. It did go through a legislative process. It failed. The legislature engaged one of the 3 separate but equal branches of government. I find it rather ironic that, and some with appreciation, but I do find it ironic that we have been asked as a legislature to be engaged in this issue. It was stated that this would not be through executive action solely. So here we are. Here we are with language that has been presented to us from the executive arena that allows us to take action to cut the cord from the legislature. The proponents of this bill recognize that and have very forthright pointed out that this is an independent body, corporate and politic. Legislative oversight, in my opinion, regardless of the results, is an important process. It is a process that I do not believe that we should, and I question if we have the authority to pass on those responsibilities. Whether things go up or down in the legislative process historically is no reason to take a different road and avoid those decisions in a formal, as an example, appropriation process or spending authority process. I believe that is the proper role of government for us to engage. Mr. President, if I may refer to the Idaho Legislative by Bill number 2012 session records.
Senator may read.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this is in regards to a bill that was brought to us in 2012 from the Department of Insurance. I reference it for one simple reason. It has in it the language, or as otherwise provided by applicable law. Good Senators, the bill you have before you, the kind sponsor has read very pertinent parts. I find the bill, with all due respect, self-conflicting. It has a purpose and intent which speaks to state sovereignty. And then, if you turn to page 4, starting on line 22, subsection D, the exchange shall not prohibit a health carrier from participating in an exchange or prohibit a health benefit plan or standalone dental plan from being sold in the exchange, so long as the health carrier or health benefit plan or standalone dental plan, and here's the key part, meets all requirements of applicable law. It does not say state law. It defaults to all applicable law. And I would present to the body in perpetuity. That means that the good senator from 22's reference to the Act applies. The countless HHS rules, regulations that were promulgated apply. Ones that have yet to be written apply. The state exchange shall not prohibit. Its hands are tied. Good Senators, to me, that's not local control, that's not checks and balances. What that provides for is a red light, green light situation. We can match you up or we cannot, depending on whether or not you comply. I don't see the checks and balances. I don't see the control. Mr. President, good Senators, the subject's been broached in regards to other proponents and supporters of a state exchange. And I will say there are differences. I don't think there are in general terms and by definition, but there are differences to the industry and to the market. And I understand that and I respect that. But I'm being asked to compromise values that I can't because of an unfortunate circumstance in that sector. The subject's been broached that there are proponents and positive commentary from the second floor that this bill could use some additional language. Now, I will be 100% upfront right here and now. That's not something that tips the scales for me to support the measure. However, the legislative process is not just about one individual legislator and what does and does not succeed in the legislative process. It's also about what I would term damage control. Measures that I ultimately cannot support, I still want to see as many sideboards and as many protective measures for constituents as possible to be incorporated. I would suggest to this body that that is not before us. And I would suggest that it is admittedly by some not before us. I cannot cast a vote on something that is not before me. I believe that the process has to hit the reset button. And I believe that that is my opinion of the circumstance for the proponents. If I were to have even more sideboards, I would maintain that equal and separate branches' authority and responsibility. I would have the legislature engage in this process every year, as difficult as it may be, for checks and balances, even though this language, to me, takes that off the table because of the authority that is simply punted to all applicable law, and again, in perpetuity. Mr. President, good Senators, those are some directions that I think can be taken. I don't think this debate ends necessarily with this bill. I understand the magnitude of the circumstances. But legislative oversight is a big sideboard. If you do support, and it's also been couched that this is simply a portal or a website, it is much, much more. Mr. President, if I may read briefly from the HHS rules to define the standards related to the establishment of an exchange, with just a few brief citings.
Having identified the source, Senator may read.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't want to open Pandora's box by making reference to tens of thousands of pages, but starting with 155.110, the exchange remains responsible for ensuring that all federal requirements related to contracted functions are met. It goes on to talk about that the exchange must not establish rules that conflict with or prevent the application of regulations promulgated under Title I, Sub D of the Affordable Care Act. The exchange must issue certificates of exemption consistent with reference sections of the Affordable Care Act. The exchange must determine eligibility standards for Medicaid and CHIP. And it goes on to talk about the obligations to collect information. This is a substantial entity. It is not simply a marketplace. I think it's very important for us to understand the magnitude, with all due respect, of what we're being asked to vote for, and the recognition, and I would say in the eyes and admitted voices of some proponents, of an incomplete measure. And with all due respect, I think that the process has to take a time out here. If there is room for pause on this language before us, that's what it is. It's pause. This dialogue doesn't stop today. And quite frankly, for those who do, and I've done due diligence, Mr. President, not to take offense to the act or the federal actions, which I do disagree with, but I will say, if one were to agree with the lion's share of those measures, I don't understand why that level of support and trust would stop when you hit the crossroads of an exchange. That to me is rather fascinating, because we already have all the other provisions. Yes, this is important, but there's far more volumes to the act and to the rules than provide for the exchange. Thank you very much, colleagues, for your indulgence, and I would ask for your no vote on this measure.